tellement quelque chose. C'est des petits chiens battus. J'ai trouvé, moi, que dans tout mon héritage, on a toujours été dit qu'on n'était pas des citoyens de première classe.
Ils sont gênés. It's hard for them to speak to somebody who's younger because I guess maybe it makes them feel insecure and because it's a little bit humiliating somehow. I don't know, because French is still associated with inferiority.
That was another reason that we were told that they were stupid, because they were too lazy to learn English, and when they did speak English, they had a definite, we called it Canuck accent, Everybody in Woonsocket had that accent except for a small group of Irish and some Italians and some Polish people. Everybody was French Canadian.
I am 12th generation from France, through Quebec and out of Orleans. And it's sad to think, for me it's sad to think that the French language would end with me. I didn't teach my kids.
Yeah. Well, that's true.
Like with my parents, they didn't speak French at all. So I lost that, and I really wish that I had been able to, keep that, or keep seeing my grandfather, my Pepe, because I feel that's like part of my culture that's gone now. It hurts now because my great-grandmother is dead, and my grandfather is dying. Sorry.
Take your time.
And it's like I'm losing the connection with the heritage. And it's hard to get it back because no one else in the family speaks.
And the more I explored it, the more I realized that people had these really profound experiences of loss and grief around not having learned a language, not having gained the cultural identity that they thought they had.
Like one conversation I would love to see happen with intelligence is the whole effect of assimilation on people, and not blaming those who have either lost their language or lost pieces of the culture, but what happened to you?
Many New England towns were still full of French people, living just down the road from 7 million French-speaking relatives in Quebec, yet you never heard or saw anything French. There was a vaguely familiar feel to this absence, as if it were a shadowy, forgotten part of everyone's story.
I just can't talk French. I understand it.
Do you understand what?
Like we're more or less breaking away slowly, you see, because my father was Canadian, but I was born American. Now my sons are born American, second generation Americans.
Yeah, I wanted to be French. I think it would be different.
Different?
Yeah.
From who?
From English. You get to speak a whole different language.
Do you think you'd have a chance to speak French if you wanted to as you grow up?
Yeah. I really wanted to, and I really want to know. And that's what I intend to do, too.
20 years later, it seemed important to understand how his parents' decision to stop using French and speak only English in the home had affected Mike and his generation.
So what happened to you? The big question, did you learn how to speak French?
No, I never did learn how to speak French. Not entirely. I can still, I could speak phrases here and there.
The feeling of being a Franco-American or being French or having that heritage, and I was sitting here feeling both, that I enjoyed it and also disappointed that I felt so distant from it now. I felt a loss.
The loss of a language they wanted to speak. It's a sore spot for Mike and Marjorie and a whole generation. It's hard for them to pinpoint just whose fault was it.
We have 5 grandchildren and there's only one that understands French. I remember when he was about this high, he knew all his prayer in French and he couldn't speak one word of English. Michael.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's because we spoke a lot of French.
Yes. And then he lost it.
We truly believed we were going to raise our children speaking French. And basically we did until they started socializing with the kids in the neighborhood and TV and going to school. I would have preferred that they would have, learned to speak more of it and kept it. Because they did. That's their first words were French. You know, and they spoke French at first.
Michael's mom is the one who expresses really most poignantly that she wishes Michael had continued to speak French. That's what she sang to him in. That's what she cooed to him in. That's the language that she told him that she loved him, and that, you know, that's the language that of his birth and his childhood. And what a profound loss for a mother. She lost the connection to that little boy because now his whole life is in English. But her best memories of him, perhaps, are in French. And it must be just brutal for a parent to make a decision to start speaking the dominant language in their own home.
How are you there? How are you there?
Bonjour, monsieur, madame. Bonsoir, la compagnie. Prenez un verre et viens vous asseoir.
Merci,
Merci.
Cheers. C'est Noël, faut bien célébrer ça, hein?
Eh ouais. Merry Christmas. Je dirais c'était tout de bien dans 1920, 22 peut-être.
It can't be easy for Mike's parents and grandparents to accept that they are really the end of a centuries-old French tradition in New England. Feelings of denial that they didn't pass the language on keep erupting into the present.
Say oui, say oui. Now, are you talking French? Can you speak French?
Ta fille, as-tu une fête de bois?
No, say no, say no.
We're learning Spanish in school.
Yeah, you like it?
No French? You ought to learn your French. Parle français comme ton grand-père et ta grand-mère.
Oui, ton papa.
Ton père parlait français avant.
Ton papa, il was
Hein?
French.
Yeah, I remember when he was young.
Tu parles français?
You used to say your Hail Mary and your Our Father, all in French. You were about this big, and I'd bring you to school. I'd get you on the stage here, and you'd say it for the ladies at the cafeteria. And I was so proud of him. Yeah, all his, Hail Mary and Our Father.
For the whole family, and especially Mike and Marjorie, the loss of their French is like a wave of regret that opens up a void, preventing cultural transmission between the generations.
Can you speak French at all, Joey?
Parle un petit peu français.
I don't really know much.
Over
You
here.
don't really know much at all? No? Well, that's okay.
Finally, there's a deep sense of sadness that besides language, something unnameable has been lost.
Mon mignon, mets tes bottes de mouton, ton manteau boutonné jusqu'au nez, mets ton foulard de laine.
Our most basic emotions are learned in our first language. And people who lose their first language lose a connection to the deepest of emotions. We know that as children grow and develop, they are created by the language as well as being creative with language.
Our first language is much more than perceptions and sounds. Anne-Sophie is hearing and feeling in ways that invite her to pay attention, experience joy, receive comfort, feel loved and accepted.
Bonjour Anne-Sophie. Ben oui. Regarde ici Caillou avec son petit canard.
All these feelings flow together in the rhythm of sounds that is the French language, and they are the earliest, deepest experiences of who Anne-Sophie is.
Language is not just verbal, it's nonverbal as well. When you stroke someone's hair, you're telling them that you love them, and that's language. The baby is hearing language and at the same time understanding that he or she is loved. Everything is familial, everything is home, just being comfortable in your own skin. And so what is being passed on to that baby is all of the different nuances that go along with the French language. And a historicism, the emotion that we feel is connected in some way to our cultural heritage. So your first language gives you a sense of your history and your culture and your time.
With her deepest emotions and heritage originally experienced only in French, can her culture be transmitted in a different language? As adults, Joe and Tyler will fondly remember candle lighting with their mère, but will they understand enough to be able to pass it on to their children with all its different meanings?
Say pépère. Oh, you'll never say pépère, huh? You'll never say pépère. I got your footsies.
Look what Pépère's doing.
Yeah, you're gonna say pépère. That's the only thing that's French that we tell you. Pépère and mémère.
As the language slips away, culture slips away.
In a one-horse open sleigh, over hills we go.
Possibly one of the most profound things is the connections to your roots. A sense of history is lost. A sense of belonging slips away too.
Do we have any right to claim any, French heritage? You really don't think about what you've had until it's gone. Do you need to speak French to be Franco-American? What is being Franco-American? I mean, is it that you're half French, half English, or that you have a French background? What aspect is it? Is it the traditions? Is it the family? Is it, the music, the food? Is it just speaking? Is it, what effects of our past are affecting us now?
For other ethnic groups traumatically disconnected from their European roots, the homogenizing inevitability of assimilation, the melting pot, is taken for granted, so it might seem odd that the loss of French would even be a subject of concern now. But the French Canadians were different. Their Quebec homeland was so near, it was normal for them to return, and they maintained the cultural connection. So they resisted typical patterns of assimilation well after others had become thoroughly Americanized. 20 years ago, when Mike was still struggling to keep his French in Lewiston, Danielle was a proper 5-year-old French-Canadian child growing up in the Beauce region of Quebec. Today, she is the mother of Anne-Sophie. She still lives in the Beauce, which is the same place Mike and Marjorie's families immigrated from 80 years ago. They might all be cousins, but they would never know it. And even if they did, this younger generation, Mike, Marjorie, and Danielle, would not be able to communicate, as neither knows the other's language. Almost 2 million French New Englanders find themselves powerless to prevent the loss of their cultural community, even though they are just on the other side of the border from 7 million of their Quebec brethren.
Mon père, il est marié à Canada en 1927, je crois. Marie-Ange.
It's as if the Spanish were to disappear from the Southwest in less than a generation, and nobody noticed. Now a young visitor from France has discovered Lewiston's almost invisible Francophone community, which she didn't even know existed. It's Le Club Survivants. Ironically, it's not a word that she knows.
Alors, je viens de France et en France,
France, on n'entend pas très souvent le mot survivance. Qu'est-ce que ça signifie pour vous?
Ça survit tout le déclin de la langue française.
Oui.
C'est pour essayer qu'on survit notre langue, qu'on la garde, qu'on continue à parler le français. Je pense qu'ils ont...
Et les jeunes n'étudient pas le français à l'école, ça ne continue pas?
Oui, ça me fait de la peine. Je lui parle en français, puis je continue à lui dire qu'il faut qu'ils viennent à Survivance française.
Mais ils ne parlent pas français parce qu'ils ne veulent pas?
Ils ne veulent pas.
Ah, bah.
Certains, oui, ils pourraient. Ben, ils disent qu'ils peuvent pas, mais on a toujours parlé français, nous autres. Et la famille, ça a toujours parlé français. Ils peuvent si qu'ils veulent, mais ils veulent pas. Non, c'est ça. Non.
J'ai 12 petits-enfants, puis malheureusement, avec tous les efforts qu'on a fait pour conserver, il n'y en a pas un qui parle français.
There's an air of bitterness here, a sense of blame, that perhaps it's the fault of the young, that they had the chance to learn the language in school and rejected it. In reality, instead of helping, schools were part of the problem.
My parents were of the generation which was subjected to the suppression of the French language in the public schools through the public humiliation and physical violence which was practiced on 6- and 7-year-old children following the compulsory education law of 1916.
Now, French-speaking children would only be able to study French in school if it was taught as a foreign language. For many, it was a bitter experience.
When I took French, every time I opened my mouth in French class, I was made fun of. I had a French teacher who's learned French out of a book, for crying out loud. But my pronunciations weren't hers, and she'd laugh.
So I rejected everything, including, the whole being French deal in a lot of ways. So in a few months, I just decided, well, if you're not supposed to have an accent, I won't have an accent.
I felt like my French wasn't any good. She made no bones about it that I wasn't speaking correct French.
So I made myself invisible. I became completely invisible.
So you became invisible to the church as well, and to your community as well as to the dominant culture.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
When you're at that vulnerable age and somebody rips you apart every day in class, after a while you get to feel like you have your language has no value, that you do not speak correctly. So if you don't speak correctly, it's best to shut your mouth.
I think powerlessness lies there, where your inherited feelings about your tools, it's been decided they don't work.
That's an awful thing to do to a person, to destroy their self-confidence, to make them feel that they don't have any worth in their language, that their language isn't worth anything, that it's slang, that it's no good. What do you do in a case like that?
I can understand individuals, given life situations, settling for less. But as a whole community deciding to settle for less, it's amazing to me. I get emotional about it. Yeah. It's so. It has to do with the church. It has to do with the huge conflict there is in defying or challenging authority, and making oneself the authority over oneself, because in this democracy, it's very difficult to get anywhere unless you occupy the 2 square feet that you happen to stand on, and if you don't, then you're relegated to a lesser role.
And I guess it's really tied up with the church, with the Catholic, the whole Catholic Church deal.
What was it that you objected to about the church? What is?
No, well, we're not going to go there, Ben. we're not going to go into that. No.
You're not. Okay.
Because we're just going to make people feel bad.
Oh, I see.
And I really don't want that to be the effect.
Yeah. But you can't even kind of hint at what it was that was a problem for you, without getting into
I couldn't.
Quand j'étais jeune, je priais Dieu en français.
la langue de ma religion nord-américaine. My religion is so deep in me that at moments of hopelessness, I write prayers in French.
No other subject is more sensitive and so clearly defines the French-Canadian Franco-American generational divide as the subject of religion and church. From antiquity, faith and language were indivisible parts of this people, sustaining them from the forest of medieval France to North American mill cities.
So you would want to confess in French?
I would. I always, notice the name of the priest, and if it's a French priest, I'll go to him.
And why would that be?
Because we don't feel well. I don't feel right when I go to English Mass. I always feel I didn't get nothing out of it. I don't know why I feel like that, but that's the way I feel. On aime le français, on désire le parler, on désire le garder. It comes from the heart. We are French and we appreciate French and we love French.
In Old Quebec, religion was central. Clerical and secular authority were inseparable. The Croix de Chemin, roadside cross, was both a commons for deliberating local matters and a sacred place where neighbors worshiped together.
And there gets to be a rhythm and people get into it, and then slowly it's almost trance, a group trance that develops. It was spiritual.
Perhaps the most central image to our religion is that of the priest saying Mass in the forest and the Indians peeking through the trees at the ceremony, at the service. That's central.
This ancient emphasis on devotion and community shaped French-Canadian communal life as a prayer in motion. The organizing factor was salvation for the whole community rather than individual success.
Our own wills, our own private wills didn't matter. And if our wills don't matter, we don't matter. Something else matters in authority.
That same mentality traveled to New England and said, we're going to live in our little neighborhoods, we're going to do our French thing, we're going to obey.
And eventually it got to be a shame of our parents, who looked very much like the thing that we didn't want to be.
You know, when that kind of conservatism is in charge, it means that, the stuff coming down the pike just isn't accepted or they don't want to deal with anything new. So there you are, behind everybody else.
We go underground with that identity, and I think we become invisible as a community, a Franco-American community.
And these attitudes inevitably translated into political powerlessness.
Souche francophone, et on n'a jamais eu une personne au niveau fédéral.
La plupart du monde, il y en a qui croient qu'ils ne sont pas représentés parce qu'ils parlent seulement un langage, puis le langage principal, c'est français.
With over 1/3 of its people French, Maine has never elected a Franco-American governor, U.S. senator, or representative. Why could there not have been a Franco-American bishop when 70% of Maine's Catholics are French? The original French Canadians had come to the New World from France 400 years ago, hoping to escape religious wars between English Protestants and French Catholics. Two separate communities grew in New France. One in Nova Scotia was called Acadie, Acadia, and the other, along the St. Lawrence River, became Quebec. Over the next 150 years, they prospered. With trade and farming communities on the best lands, their dominion extended as far west as the Mississippi River and Louisiana. But in the mid-1700s, history repeated itself. Europe's religious wars would find them once again in North America. The British, victorious in Europe, now became the political overseers of Acadia, but they would want it all. To obtain the rich farmlands belonging to the French habitants, they embarked on a brutal campaign of what today would be considered ethnic cleansing. It was called the Grand Dérangement, an uprooting of a people. So determined were the British to have all of Acadia be English-speaking, Protestant, and British-owned that they broke the Acadian people into pieces without mercy, shattering families and communities, burning them off the face of their land, casting them on all sides of the Atlantic. A short time later, the conquest of the French in Quebec reduced the whole society there to a semi-feudal enclave. It was governed by a subservient elite of wealthy land barons and a conservative clergy. A primary goal was to protect the faith by increasing the Catholic population dramatically. They relied exclusively on French, thus isolating themselves from the surrounding English world. This was the foundation of La Survivance. But over time, Quebec could not prosper, and its people became desperately poor. By the late 1900s, the Industrial Revolution had unleashed forces that would now draw impoverished French Catholic Quebec right into the heart of English Protestant New England.
We were taught to hate the French. People hated the French. They hated the French Canadians. They just called them Canucks, or, you know, the frog. And I remember not thinking that there was anything wrong with that at the time, because I was growing up in a bigoted atmosphere about the French Canadians.
I can still feel the same kind of a shock, like when my dad told me. I mean, it's because it's almost a disbelief. It's like, what? You know, because that's what I said. I said, what are you talking about? You know, and he said, yeah. You know, he says, KKK. He says, they marched on the French in Maine and they burned crosses on. I said, that's crazy. He said, no, it was true. It was true.
As we stood there, we could see the Camden Hills in the distance. And the two friends that we had been going to see came running up the road towards us, and they called out, hey, they're burning a cross on Dodger's Mountain.
I asked my father, and he said, oh yes, the KKK were there, and that he had witnessed one cross burning. And when I spoke to other people that we had interviewed, before, and I'd say, I understand the KKK was active in the area, and they'd go.
For me, it was just this whole thing of, you know, getting at the question of the shame and the secret.
We had heard stories about the Ku Klux Klan, and when I realized that this was evidence of them right here in Maine, and that if they were burning a cross, I was very frightened.
You couldn't get anything out of them. It was like, this is not a subject to be discussed.
Almost 1 million French Canadians had flooded into the region's new factory towns. But they were different from other immigrants. They were not interested in assimilating, becoming Americanized. They had survived culturally through a fierce resistance to anything English. So the majority, never intending to stay, would return often to Quebec on what became a two-way immigration corridor from an archipelago of communities now so French they were sometimes referred to as Quebec en Sud, Lower Quebec.
Political structure of towns such as Lewiston, for instance, and others, reacted to what they perceive as an invasion, a cultural invasion coming from Quebec. And there was 1 million that came within a period of 50 years, so they were hordes, but they were invited. But at the same time, once they invited them, they saw that politically it could change their authority, it could diminish their authority.
After repressive language laws were enacted, there was an assault against the power of the French clergy with help from the Irish Catholic Church. The right to have French priests, the right to pray in French, was lost. A campaign against imagined political aspirations of Catholic French Canadians would soon evolve. It focused on repression of the French language.
But the deepest scar was left by a period most would like to forget, a time of real violence against us when the Ku Klux Klan tried to become the dominant political force in New England.
Religious and civic leaders brought the Klan to New England. Protestant clergymen enthusiastically admonished their congregations to join. By the mid-1920s, the Ku Klux Klan had memberships in the hundreds of thousands. States like Maine and Massachusetts had more Ku Klux Klan members than either Mississippi, Alabama, or any other southern state.
We had heard stories about things the Klan did, and I was afraid they might be coming to Maine to do some of the same things.
And what would some of those things be?
Oh, the lynchings and the mob scenes and the way they treated minorities.
The New England Klan had a special power to intimidate. It was a visible part of everyday civic life. There was no need for them to hide their faces. Klansmen were neighbors, community leaders, employers. The first Klan march ever held in broad daylight was in Milo, Maine. Postcards commemorated the event.
She told me, she said that, you know, we knew who was under those sheets in the KKK because our neighbors.
On the surface, the Klan in Yankee New England presented itself as another fraternal organization. There was even a women's auxiliary that actively socialized, organized, and reproduced the Klan ideology throughout the community. This Klan doll might have been a table decoration, a keepsake for a child. By 1925, they had elected a governor. When they won a local election, they had a cross burning. It was a celebration and a warning.
I think back and I think, for me, if I were a parent and I had little kids at home, and I looked out the window at night and saw a cross burning across the river and knew that those people hated everything that I stood for, I think it would pretty much terrify me.
The Klan's true agenda would now become clear: to suppress the French Catholic identity in public and eliminate it as a basis of political power.
If you were French, you were Catholic. The two went like this. There would be nothing other than my language. My skin was the same color as everybody else. So what's going to make you stand out? What's going to say, okay, folks, here I am? It would be a language. So if I were a parent, that would be one very good reason for me to try to get my children speaking English and not carry the French.
As the Klan gathered strength, its threat of terror became more overt, legitimizing an atmosphere of increasing mob violence against French communities.
The Ku Klux Klan was going to come across the bridge and burn the island down, and that the men on the island heard about it and stopped them. They went to the bridge in Milford and stopped them.
By 1924, the threat had turned to outright violence against French-speaking neighborhoods. There were pitched battles all over New England. Hundreds were wounded, battling the Klan with rocks and clubs. But the terror only strengthened their resolve. They formed increasingly bold unions in places like Woonsocket, Rhode Island. Yet, other forces would also impact the French. The stock market crash and world depression would soon close the U.S. border to economic migration. The New England French gradually lost contact with Quebec as the next generation no longer knew their family there. Now, cut off from Quebec as Quebec had been from France 200 years before, the French community sank deeper into a cultural limbo of isolated ethnic enclaves.
And we were Americanized, I guess, or Anglo-Saxonized, without even knowing it. I mean, they didn't come out and tell us we were doing that. They just simply stopped certain culture of their heritage.
Because they were in the United States here, and the language is English, and I figured that's what we should talk, which it is, but it's nice to know both. Well, how do you feel about it? You're French?
I didn't want to speak French for about 10 years.
Why?
And they were dumb Canuck. That's what she said. They were a dumb Canuck, or a stupid Canuck. They were just not very bright. That's what we thought. And they had all the worst jobs at that time in the 50s and 60s.
I felt that...
Stupid?
No, I felt
ashamed.
I felt like people were laughing at me. So.
Well, that's all I'm saying right here.
You shouldn't be learning French. It's no longer important. You should learn Spanish. I don't want to learn Spanish. My great-grandparents were all French.
Bonjour, madame.
And because it seemed people really wanted to reconnect with their culture, we had this idea to recreate a traditional French-Canadian soiree atmosphere and show films from Quebec.
I liked it because it reminded me of all the stories my grandfather told me when I was growing up.
So my father came down to work in the mills, and so did all of his brothers.
So it was evoked a lot of memories, sort of emotional ones.
Quebec film actually awakened memories long hidden. It's the idea that this is the story of your family and that the people in the film are in fact your ancestors. And the culture is still alive.
C'est dommage. C'est dommage, hein, qu'on soit trop vieux pour se dire des mots d'amour.
Well, they were close, very close. And that reminded me of the French, where they were so close and they helped each other.
I've seen that kind of relationship looking back. It has to do with, the idea of humility and not thinking too much of oneself. That goes with the whole Catholic culture, and especially the French Canadian, as I recall it.
Plus gentil, plus relaxé. Et puis, il pensait pas toujours avoir quelque chose de meilleur que l'autre. Et puis, c'était plus une vie plus gentille.
Because somebody tried to take it away from me, and I want that. That is not fair. I want it back, and I will go get it.
What we want to negotiate is a new deal between two peoples who also comprise two nations, based on the only possible way out of the bind we've been in for years and years, political equality.
These films were a product of Quebec's quiet revolution, a questioning of their past that created a political voice which saved their language and transformed Quebec into a prosperous nation. In a cinema, New England Francos were seeing Quebec and finding themselves.
Respire lentement. Par la bouche.
In order to understand yourself, sometimes you have to know what happened before you, what the generations before you were like.
How come?
Because we're a product of the past.
Do you feel yourself as a product of the past?
Yeah, I think I understood myself better once I knew about my ancestors.
The scene that touched me really the most was the little white casket. And the reason it did was because of a baby I had in 1962 who died. So I found out that my mother-in-law lost 5 babies. At the time, I didn't know about those 5 babies. So my view of her has changed completely, right? And my view of my husband, who was a child growing up in this family who saw his mother have these 5 babies, all of whom died.
By facing the dark side of their own experience, a truer picture of the real emotional history of the culture emerges. This allows young people to participate as equals rather than being made passive receivers of a heritage that had already happened.
Struggles change a lot. Like my family, since we never really had that, things happened and my parents got divorced and we had more emotional struggles. We don't have that close unity of our family. And
watching the movie, I don't know anything about their heritage or anything like that, and it makes me want to go and spend time with my Nana and my Pep and learn more about my French heritage and where they're from and how they lived and how his parents lived and how their parents lived, because they never tell stories like that. So it makes me want to sit down and talk to them about it. That I never really felt that way before.
I was cut off from that side of my family, but I do have a great aunt who speaks French and tells me a lot of stories.
Rachel is reconnecting with the French side of her family.
Oh, I can speak French, but I want you to learn.
Yeah.
It is like rediscovering a lost part of herself, something attractive, familiar and strong.
See, I think you showed Wes this picture of the canoes that you built.
My father was a trapper and a guide. And when he was gone, I was the one that had to take over.
Being very self-sufficient, I think she just had a lot of strength. I mean, she was really independent, you know. She didn't take any shit at all. She said if we started talking in French, these things would come back to me, and I said that's probably why she wanted me to speak French with her and learn French.
You are a hunter, right? So would you say that like a chasseur?
A chasseuse, oui.
Chasseuse.
Chasseuse would be
the man.
A chasseur is a man, and the chasseuse is a woman.
Okay.
I would like to have Rachel closer to me, and when she'd come in the door, just say hello, ma tante.
Okay.
Hello, bonjour, ma tante would be the proper thing. But
bonjour,
then,
ma tante.
Bonjour, so you say that perfect. You speak to me in French, and I'll see if I don't know if I can understand you.
Qu'est-ce que vous mangez pour petit déjeuner?
J'ai mangé pour mon déjeuner, dîner.
Petit déjeuner.
Déjeuner.
Déjeuner?
Déjeuner, that's breakfast.
Okay. We always call it petit déjeuner, lunch déjeuner.
Oh. That's you're learning. That's why I never tried to talk with you and speak with you in French, because this is more of a gibberish than it is anything.
She is hard to understand for me because I've always heard just like in school and Parisian.
Sometimes it's actually small differences between standard and local French that create frustrations, reproduce feelings of shame, and stop communication.
I don't like that. I want to be able to understand that stuff that's coming from the woods, you know? Because had I grown up like that, had I spoken French growing up, that's what I would know.
It always burns me up when they tell me that I'm speaking the wrong French because it's not the Parisian accent.
That's right.
The same as people in English. They come from Brooklyn, the southern accent. I called for reservations one time for Orlando. The girl told me, boy, what an accent you have. I said, you should talk. You know, man, I could hardly understand her, you know. But we had a nice conversation.
Moi, j'ai pas l'accent parisien non plus parce que je viens de Bordeaux.
What has struck me about Québécois French is how rich it is. That they have preserved the language in as beautiful shape as they have is a miracle.
On n'a pas un français propre, je me suis fait dire qu'on avait un français sale, un mauvais français, mais c'est un français qui est le nôtre.
Le français du Québec.
Un français de nos ancêtres, un français qui a une couleur, qui a une richesse. Un héritage. C'est ça, on a un héritage culturel. On n'ira pas chercher un français d'un autre continent qui ne s'attache pas, qui ne se rattache pas à nous, à notre situation. Parce qu'être français, c'est être français dans le cœur. Être beauceron, c'est être beauceron dans le cœur. C'est une langue du cœur. C'est une langue qui a une couleur, qui s'est adaptée à la localité, à la situation qu'il y avait ici.
Banane, chaque jour.
Now tell me what I had for breakfast. Don't be shy.
Vous mangez deux pièces de pain.
Tu tranches de pain?
Un verre de jus d'orange et une banane. du café. No?
Oui. Yeah, if you were to ask for that in French somewhere, you would get it.
The affection carries them through the difficulties this time, but it hasn't been easy for either of them. Soon Rachel will leave to study abroad to gain the confidence to converse fully with her aunt in French.
She had certain things that she promised that she'd say, oh, I'll tell you sometime.
When Rachel returns, her aunt has since died.
If she were still alive, probably we would try harder. Because my French is so much better now than it was then. I wish that I could talk to her.
They will never be able to speak in French of those special things they had both dreamed of sharing. Her aunt's unique experience and strength of character are now in the past, a memory to learn from. But they had the courage to begin. Rachel seized an historic moment to reconnect before it was too late.
I think with time, we could have, gotten to a place that was more comfortable, just conversational French, where it just gets easier. Like she says, if you just come and say, bonjour ma tante, bonjour ma tante.
Et je ne pensais pas que mon français va me servir comme aujourd'hui. Donc, le français m'a permis d'expliquer et d'exprimer mes sentiments, mes peines, mes douleurs.
C'est quand j'ai tracé la généalogie et l'histoire des gens de Québec qui ont quitté le pays pour venir s'établir ici. J'étais très triste et ça m'a ouvert aussi le cœur à tous les gens dans tout le monde entier qui doivent quitter leur pays pour une raison ou l'autre.
Ça m'a étonnée parce que je ne m'attendais pas à quelqu'un ou quelqu'un qui peut me comprendre. Mais quand je venais ici, je me suis dit il doit y avoir des gens qui parlent le français dans cette ville.
Well, once I started to understand Anna's story, I put myself in her place. And I felt very sad for her, having to leave her country and come here and know not one person. Well, if I wanted to respond to Anna and I wanted to comfort her and reassure her, I needed to find my French. So I really pushed myself to learn my French.
C'est vrai, c'était très dur parce que Sylvia ne parlait pas le français du tout. Elle comprenait les mots.
Oui. Je pouvais comprendre, mais je ne pouvais pas m'exprimer. Je ne pouvais pas mettre une phrase ensemble. Pas du tout. Parce que ici aux États-Unis, toute la vie est en anglais. Et malgré que j'avais parlé seulement le français quand j'étais enfant, je l'ai perdu avec le temps. Sans le français, on n'aurait jamais eu l'occasion de se connaître. Parce que moi, j'avais assez de français pour comprendre Anna, mais elle n'avait pas un mot d'anglais.
En français, c'est tellement bon. On se comprend tellement. On peut tout se dire en français. Je le trouve plus doux. C'est tellement gentil. Il y a rien de brusque.
C'est plus chaleureux en français.
Oui.
Ça, c'est vrai.
C'est la seule raison.
Oui. C'est comme une langue privée pour nous. Ça me donne des bénéfices dans mon cœur aussi parce que, à part d'avoir trouvé Anna, j'ai aussi regagné les histoires de ma jeunesse. Parce qu'il y a beaucoup des histoires de ma jeunesse que je me rappelle seulement maintenant. Peut-être parce que dans ma jeunesse, je parlais seulement le français et toutes les idées étaient, comment est-ce qu'on dit, renfermées dans ma tête en français et ça ne pouvait pas sortir en anglais.
J'aime le français et aujourd'hui, je l'aime encore plus parce que quand j'ai décidé de quitter mon pays et de venir dans un autre continent, je ne pensais pas que je vais rencontrer quelqu'une comme Sylvia.
It has certainly opened up the world and the possibilities for both of us.
I love you.
Many people here in Woonsocket who never had the opportunity to know a person of another culture, a black person, have now learned to accept and understand and love Anna.
Out of that, I feel we are family. This family is very good and great for us because I was lonely, very lonely. But now with Sylvia, with all the family, with all the French Canadian here and all Woonsocket, that feel very good. We have family.
In her side, many of her people have become more knowledgeable about Americans and more comfortable with white people in America because Anna's brought many of them here and we intermix often.
Anna is from Senegal, she's African, and you guys are from here. You guys are American, Canadian, I'm not very sure. But, seemingly, there's no family link between you guys and Anna.
Il faut se dire la vérité, elle est blanche, je suis noire. Il ne faut pas se voiler la face. C'est des choses qui existent. Je viens dans un autre pays. Elle avait tout pour avoir peur de moi. Mais pourquoi elle n'a pas eu peur? Elle m'a juste accepté. Ça, c'est extraordinaire.
We've seen racism in this country, and you guys didn't show that, and you could have. So it's very, very thankful once again, and God bless you. God bless you for everything that you've done for her.
It's opened up more for my family because my children have a larger family now and it's not all the same color. I look at it especially as an advantage for my grandchildren to learn about new cultures. And my children will never grow up being uncomfortable with people of another color.
Anna's daughter Robbie has just given birth to her first grandchild. One half of a baptism ceremony is taking place at Sylvia's house, 8 days after the birth, with the Franco-African community present. In Senegalese tradition, the Muslim cleric, or imam, is the first to give the infant its name, whispering it as a prayer.
His name Muhammad.
While on the same day, across the Atlantic Ocean, in the mosque of Anna's family, the infant's African community performs the other half of the baptism with prayer, sacrifice, and chanting from the Quran.
I think it's a beautiful connection because it shows that the child is not just a part of the place he's living. He's part of a greater picture. He's part of both families, the family here and the family there. C'est très difficile pour moi de parler, mais je suis très fière d'être franco-américaine et j'espère. I really want to learn to speak French.
What if the tragedy for a whole generation is not that they lost a language, but that they think they lost a language which is actually still in them?
I got to get this language thing down. I couldn't understand. I was losing it, and it made me almost panic. Like, I got to do something here.
For Sylvain and Linda, the Franco-American Film Festival had released a deep yearning to be French again. They felt the French was still in them, so they decided to do something about it.
Dans la tête, dans le cœur, dans le corps. Et nous essayons d'encourager le français.
Can you sing with me?
I'm going to listen. You want to laugh.
La Sainte Vierge vont chanter.
It'll be more French. It was kind of an invitation to anyone who had spoken French in the past and was not using it now to see if there was any way that they could find their lost French. L'anglais ou le français, c'est ce qui vient naturellement.
Julia Schultz is exploring French language reacquisition.
And the way we understand it is the relearning or the reacquiring, reawakening of a language that was laid down in a person's brain and is now coming back to life.
It just reminds me of my mother saying to me, you know, as rocking, and she used to sing different songs to me. And I have another one, La Claire Fontaine. Il y a longtemps que je t'aime, jamais je ne t'oublierai.
Il y a longtemps que je t'aime, jamais je ne t'oublierai.
Scientists now regard first language as a complex map of circuits that begins developing in the child's brain in infancy. If, as now thought, these circuits are hardwired linguistic patterns entwined with early emotional memories, then they may never be lost.
Jamais je ne t'oublierai.
Père, yeah. I remember your grandmother. Je me rappelle de ta grand-mère. Yeah.
Jouer le piano?
Oui, oui, yeah.
You were taken inside. They're going back to early memories, childhood memories. And those memories were formed in French. And so to go into French means to go automatically back to that memory center.
It's like an archaeology project. You're just digging away the layers and trying to get back to where you once were. And because it's connected then with the notion of reclaiming a past and reclaiming a history.
If a man is mad and he says tabarnak, he's mad about something, that's swearing.
It's about one of the worst things you can say. Oh, God, Ian. Oh, Lent.
I think a lot of people didn't even know what they were saying.
They began to explore spontaneously the language that they know.
My mother always used to call me tête de pioche.
Yes, that's another, tête de pioche.
Est-ce que vous avez d'autres expressions en tête? People's French was coming out in whole phrases. And that's, I think, what they were looking for is, in some way, trying to see if they really had any French left in them, and then at the same time wondering what it would look like if they found it, and what it would mean about themselves as people.
Let's play hockey! Au ciel, au ciel, au ciel, j'irai la voir un jour.
I'm creating a ruckus in Wordable, a Franco ruckus. I want you to help me. I want to hear French words that are special to you. So I started this evening called Parlons notre langue. And I started it for French conversation, but the people that showed up were older people that like to party.
Attendez donc, ma soeur, j'ai pas fini encore. Oh, lavabo popiné.
When I was younger, my aunts and uncles came over every weekend, and we just had major réveillons. They treated us like we were part of them. It's in my blood, this love of my heritage, and it makes me very comfortable when I speak French, when I hear French things. And I haven't keyed into that for a great part of my life, and it's all coming back, and it's fabulous.
It seems that socializing and reminiscence alone aren't enough to revive a culture, so Sylvain has invited a ghost from the past.
ici pour apprendre. Et nous sommes misérables pour l'éternité. C'est la fête semaine avec lui. Imaginez, un temps imaginaire. Et là,
I want local French spoken here. This is where we are, and I don't care if it's Parisian or what. And if it's visible, people will get permission to speak French again. I'm tired of being quiet about things that bother me. It's time to speak out.
parce que c'est ma langue. C'est ma langue. C'est assez.
It just makes me very excited when people are just beginning. It's in them. It just needs somebody to trigger them a little bit. You can speak French in public. This is the way it used to be. This is okay. It will be accepted. And come out with it, you know?
Non, on est un peu. Petit français, non. Pas français. Non.
C'est dommage.
C'est dommage.
Absolutely not. Je comprends pas français?
No.
No. Bonjour, madame et messieurs. Si vous comprenez le français, levez la main.
Levez la main si vous comprenez le français. On va
I mean, it was a conscious effort for most people not to use French. So the idea of speaking French now in public for many people, for many Franco-Americans, is revolutionary in itself. That we would accept that French teachers, French speakers, and the Franco-Americans themselves would accept that their French, the French that they speak, really is French, and that it is part of the whole French-speaking world. That's, for a lot of people, a revolutionary concept.
I like to come back, because Waterville is a French community. So is Winslow, especially Winslow, and all these areas are French communities. And I'd like to see it come back, and I like to hear people talk on Main Street or at the mall and speak French.
Because the French are still so isolated from each other, the dream of a viable French community in New England might seem unrealistic. But Madawaska, Maine is a completely bilingual French town.
It is the Martin reunion.
Les familles dans Vallée Saint-Jean sont vraiment uniques. Ils vont recevoir pareil comme un membre de ta famille. Ça va être pas où tu vas dans la vallée, ça va être pas ce que tu fais. Tu vas sentir aimé, tu vas sentir joyeux en cause tout le monde que tu connais, que tu parles avec, sont joyeux d'être dans la vallée.
C'est pas le même français parce que c'est la France. C'est la langue a changé et ça, mais l'accent.
Là-bas, pour qu'être là-bas, donc tu vas te manger tête tout faite.
Oui.
En France. En France.
Il n'y a pas de choix, tu dois expliquer.
Becky has just returned from studying in France. Madawaska's bilingual education program has allowed her to function in a wider francophone world and still value her own local French.
J'aime bien de voir une culture comme ça, parce que ici, il y a une histoire qui va avec la région et il y a une culture, il y a une langue.
Je pense que Madawaska est très riche, la culture à Madawaska est très riche et tout le monde aime parler le français, c'était comme ça toujours.
Je pense que la culture acadienne va rester parce que je pense que ça va rester. Si les générations plus jeunes vont entretenir ça. Je pense que ça va rester.
Driven out of Acadia 250 years ago, the march symbolizes the Acadians' forced exile and their struggle to return. Their history is diaspora and reunion. Today, the Acadian return still continues, even if the forces are more economic than political.
Coming back here feels like I'm witnessing the seasons, and I think about how my grandparents and my grandparents' grandparents saw the same things. And all of the different sides of my family have been living here since the 1600s. Not here, but the whole area of like Quebec, New Brunswick, Maine. The idea that I can actually imagine what it was like for my grandmother's grandmother's grandmother. I find it really comforting and just beautiful.
Je pense que nos parents et nos ancêtres ont beaucoup d'influence sur nous autres. Et je pense que c'est pour ça que les Acadiens ont tant d'influence sur nous autres.
Mes parents veulent que je apprenne beaucoup de mes ancêtres. Et puis, ils pensent que c'est vraiment important de parler la langue de mes ancêtres, français. Ça fait que je pense que c'est une grosse partie de ma vie, parce que c'est une grosse partie de la vie de mes parents.
Acadians often refer to the ancestors as if they were among them still, voyaging through time, humbly yet proudly protecting this culture and people back together again.
Even though it's French and settled by a long line of people who came from France to parts of Canada to here, there's so much pride that it feels like patriotic, it feels American. And that, that's a great feeling. I just felt like I had inherited an incredible culture, but also a responsibility to understand it and to value it.
Oui, je pense que je vais venir back parce que je veux être avec ma famille et j'aime le français. Puis je veux mes enfants parlent français aussi. Puis je pense que c'est vraiment important.
Cendre à cendre, poussière à poussière, tempête de feu, odeur de braise. Séparer les éléments. Oubliez le petit cri que t'as poussé, comment ta tête a pu tomber.
When I got the accordion, it brought me into this new world for me, la musique française, French music in Louisiana, and brought me to the realization of my own identity as a Français d'Amérique, a French-speaking North American.
Zach Richard is a Cajun Acadian from Louisiana. He's an internationally recognized musician and poet who relearned his French when he saw what was happening to his family and culture.
The tragedy of my grandparents was having grandchildren with whom they could not communicate. I wanted to speak to the old people. I was in love with the old people. I thought that they just had this beautiful thing that they were giving to me.
I saw it a lot to me and my mom. I really did, in the way she was always, I don't know, just so close-knit with her parents and grandparents, and it's almost a way of looking at life differently, that people are more important than the material things out there. I really do think it is in the heart. I really do. I wouldn't know how else to put it into words.
Love. It's very simple. I loved those people, and they loved me. And we spoke in French. So in my subconscious mind, French is associated with this very, very powerful emotion, which is what I felt from my grandparents.
Fred has this gorgeous harmonica playing. It's very subtle. He does it really artfully. So it kind of has a little halo or glow around each note. Sometimes he just glides into the note with a little nimbus around it.
Of course, I made up the last part of that one.
I wrote some of those chords and notes into the rest of the piece.
Oh.
So the orchestra's gonna play it.
Sometimes it takes an artist from outside the culture to rediscover its values. Alexis Aldrich has written an orchestral suite based on the hidden French music of people like Fred Legere.
I think that human beings can get together and do something magic with life. Something exciting, something sparkling, something spectacular. Yeah, that's a big part of French culture.
Hey, anybody out there want to dance?
Even in places where French is no longer spoken, the hidden culture continues to produce emerging forms, like the popular contra dances of New England. Now a new generation of artists is working with the Franco experience, producing hybrid forms, where both Francos and the non-French can rediscover the emotional history of a people and perhaps release its creative energy.
Hey, Monsieur Cartier, je ne voudrais pas vous décourager, hein? Cette histoire-là, je l'ai racontée seulement pour vous montrer que nous autres, les Franco-Américains, quand on essaie de s'approcher à la France ou la culture française, pourquoi avoir peur d'une culture si glorieuse, si resplendissante, une culture qui fait la joie du monde entier, une culture parce que ça nous étouffe? Si on va voir quelque chose en français, là, hein, ça vient tout de la France. Il n'y a rien de site, hein. Pièces, livres, musique, ça vient tout de là. Il n'y a rien de site, hein.
It's the language that nurtures the soul and the spirit and of the culture. And without the language, the spark is gone. The energy's gone. There's nothing to keep it going. You're translating the culture into a foreign language and you can't do it.
Le troisième tiers de la population s'est caché dans le bois pendant au moins 8 ans, le temps de marcher et de prier. Ils ont marché, ils ont ramé, mais ils n'ont jamais oublié. Je vais prendre l'amour entre mes mains pour faire un petit trou. C'est quelque chose que je dois faire chaque jour.
Reunion within the family, between generations that have had a different French experience. Reunion with the language and lost parts of yourself. Reunion within the community. Reunion with French-speaking Canada in the shared bioregion of our northeast forest. Where could the reunion with the Quebecois and Acadians of New Brunswick begin? What might it look like?
Me sentir. Moi, c'est le Maine.
Moi, je dirais au Québec.
Quand je vous ai entendu parler puis que ça a commencé à bouger des choses, ça m'a tellement fait revenir un paquet de souvenirs.
Le meilleur, c'est d'avoir du bon temps et de rire ensemble. Rire, c'est le meilleur remède.
Notre mémoire au Québec, elle est ici avec les Franco-Américains parce que vous l'avez si bien préservée.
Une tradition, une histoire commune. Oui, et nous sommes, pour moi, nous sommes encore attachés au Québec. C'est nos racines.
Je trouve que M. Lavigne veut prendre son film et aller au Canada. Laisser savoir aux Québécois qu'on est encore Québécois, on a des racines au Québec. Demain, ben, on pourrait rencontrer les deux ensemble.
J'aime les films, mais je ne sais pas ma héritage.
Merci.
J'ai une carte franco-américaine.
You can switch to English.
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead. No, bravo. I mean, he did it. So what do you see for the future? What are you up to?
I'm up to anything. I just want to get back to my heritage and find out what it's like, and I'll do anything.
Could it be that young people already understand that culture is what we are actually doing right now?
C'est naturel, c'est
quelque chose à apprendre quand on a...
If we're choosing to speak in French, then we're making French culture.
Il y a les 4 questions aujourd'hui.
It's not so much preserving a heritage as choosing to live the heritage spontaneously in the present, open to all its possibilities. Older people are carrying a hidden French that can live again. All of us are part of a cultural renewal that so many long for.
Who is to say that robbing a people of a language is less violent than war? It's not a physical violence, it's an emotional and spiritual violence. If every language that you learn makes you yet again another man, then every language that you lose lessens you by one person as well.
Because you can blunder and you can really feel bad about yourself, but dare to continue.
What possibilities could we imagine if it were really possible to wake up that sleeping French?
Bonjour, madame et messieurs. Si vous comprenez le français, levez les mains.
Digga digga die die, digga digga die die, digga digga die die, dee die die, digga digga die, digga digga die die, dee da da die da da dee die die, da da dee die die, dee die die, digga digga die, digga digga die die, dee da da die da da dee die die, da da dee die die. Par derrière chez mon père, il y a un pommier doux, il y a un pommier doux. Les 3 filles d'un prince sont endormies dessous. Ah, j'ai des graines de meilleur, j'ai des graines de paille, j'ai des oranges, j'ai du tri, j'ai des colis, j'ai des allumettes, j'ai des ananas, des péras fleuris, des lauriers fleuris, j'ai du zi, j'ai des inésis, j'ai des inésinés, j'ai des inésos, j'ai des beaux, j'ai des beaux, j'ai des beaux oiseaux. Les 3 filles d'un prince sont endormies dessous, sont endormies dessous. La plus jeune se réveille, dit mon père, il est jour. Ah, j'ai des graines de meilleur, j'ai des graines de paille, j'ai des orangers, j'ai du tri, j'ai des ticolis, j'ai des allumettes, j'ai des ananas, des péras fleuris, des lauriers fleuris, j'ai du zi, j'ai du zinési, j'ai du zinéziné, j'ai du zinéso, j'ai des beaux, j'ai des beaux, j'ai des beaux oiseaux. La plus jeune se réveille, dit mon père, il est jour, dit mon père, il est ce n'est qu'une étoile.